Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Raymore City Council regular meeting for Monday, September the 13th, 2021. I will call the meeting to order and ask for the roll call.
Councilmember Abdelgawad, absent. Councilmember Barber.
Present.
Councilmember Berenson.
Present.
Councilmember Burke.
Present.
Councilmember Circo.
Present.
Councilmember Holman.
Present.
Councilmember Townsend.
Present.
Councilmember Wills Scherzer.
Present.
Mayor Turnbow.
Present. Would you all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item on our agenda this evening is presentations, and with us tonight we have the Belton City Clerk, Andrea Cunningham, to make a presentation. Andrea?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Andrea Cunningham, the City Clerk for the City of Belton. I'm here on behalf of the Missouri City Clerks and Finance Officers Association to recognize your City Clerk, Erica Hill, for earning her Missouri Registered City Clerk Sustaining Certification on June 7th, 2021. Erica was hired as Deputy City Clerk with the City of Raymore in August 27th, 2012. On November 1st, 2020, Erica was appointed as the City Clerk. Erica joined the Missouri City Clerks and Finance Officers Association and the International Institute of Municipal Clerks in 2012. She has attended many dedicated hours of educational sessions over the past several years and earned her Missouri Registered City Clerk certification from the State Association on March 9th, 2016. On May 9th, 2017, Erica earned her Certified Municipal Clerk certification from the International Institute of Municipal Clerks Association. On March 8th, 2019, Erica earned her Missouri Registered City Clerk continuing certification. Knowing the importance of promoting the general welfare of her city's governmental operations, Erica continuously strives toward performing services that best meet the interests and needs of the public as efficiently and effectively as possible, ever improving administrative techniques used in the operation of municipal governments, while implementing all she has learned through the two City Clerks Associations over the years. Erica has worked very hard to attain the Missouri Registered City Clerk Sustaining Certification. This certification is a combination of education and experience, and Erica should be commended for her perseverance in achieving this goal. Additionally, you, as the elected officials, are to be commended for your continued support. It clearly demonstrates that you recognize the knowledge that she receives at the state and local educational sessions is of great value to you, to other staff, and to your citizens. Please join me in recognizing Erica for her hard-earned achievement of her MRCC Sustaining Certification, and as she continues her commitment to lifelong learning in her career as City Clerk. Congratulations.
Thank you, Andrea. And I hear congratulations is also in order for yourself because you achieved the same goal. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations, Erica.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
As everyone returns to their seats, it's your purview, but I would ask at this time if you would consider recognizing a moment of silence for the 13 military members that lost their lives during the exit from Afghanistan.
I'd be happy to do that, sir.
Sir.
So we will do that at this moment. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Holman, for reminding me of that. We'll now move on to personal appearances. First on the agenda under personal appearances is Mr. Jim Haddock to speak to us about the Watermark project. And be sure that all the speakers understand that we have a 5-minute limitation. Thank you, sir.
I did bring hard copies. I left them with Mr. Fearborn. I didn't think it was important to pass them out, but they are available if you want them. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in opposition to Bill 3647, Watermark at Raymore, Chapter 100 request. My name is Jim Haddock. I live at 909 Wesley Circle. I'm not here to surprise you. I previously emailed each of you and city staff a copy of these comments on Friday. I also included several pages of supporting text, along with links to several documents and videos for your convenience. If you took the opportunity to read through what I sent, the next 5 minutes will be very boring. Also, if anything I present is wrong, you have had the opportunity to correct me. Before I start, let's be clear about what Bill 3647 is. This is a plan to provide real property tax abatement and sales tax exemption to an Indiana-based company named Thompson Thrift Incorporated for the construction of a 300-unit Class A apartment community. The apartments would be located on 21 acres immediately south of Sam's Club, currently owned by David Block. I oppose this plan to provide property tax abatement and sales tax exemption for the following 8 reasons. 1, nothing the developer has said or presented, nothing city staff has said or presented, and nothing found in the 20 relevant pages of your meeting e-packet explain how this project will promote the economic welfare and the development of the city, or will be in furtherance of the public purposes set forth in the act. The apartment complex Thompson Thrift is proposing is not one of the 8 types of development described in the act, nor has anyone explained how it might attract any of these. No one has guaranteed nor even promised Raymore anything but an apartment complex. You have to connect dots that aren't on these pages to vote for this. 2, when pressed at the August 23 council meeting, the developer provided a single example of a project that received similar incentives. They described a $10 million parking garage within a mixed-use development in Fishers, Indiana. The 18-acre development that parking garage was built for pays nearly 8 times more in property tax than the year 2 pilots proposed in this plan. And that number is $1.35 million versus $171,000. 3, the cost-benefit analysis found in the e-packet is incomplete. It does not consider the school district's cost associated with this project, which is the responsibility to educate additional public school students. The only true cost-benefit analysis I have heard of was what Dr. Slagle and Board Member York referred to on August 23rd, and it is not attached. 4, city staff agreed the pilots proposed will not support the developer's estimate of the number of school-aged children likely to live in this apartment complex. During the July 6 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the developer stated their estimate of 21 school-aged children. During the August 23 council meeting, Dr. Slagle stated and city staff agreed the pilots proposed would not support 16 additional students at present levels. 5, the assessed value and growth rate assumptions used in the cost-benefit analysis would be conservative if used for budgeting or bonding purposes. However, they almost certainly result in an underestimate of the benefit to the developer in this analysis. The abatement level calculated with these assumptions could only be described as the minimum level of benefit the developer will realize. The developer's actual benefit will almost certainly be greater. It could easily be $5 million greater than the nearly $8 million calculated. 6, the pilots associated with the venue at the Good Ranch, a 204-unit luxury townhome community currently under construction less than 1 mile south of this project site, were calculated to represent 100% of the tax that would be owed on the property without abatement. 7, rezoning of Ridgeview Estates is the very first item of new business you will consider later this evening. Ironically, this 60-unit, age-restricted residential development would be located on the closest undeveloped property currently zoned commercial. The conceptual plan staff prepared for this commercial tract appears on page 103 of tonight's e-packet, and it includes an additional 502-unit multifamily community. 8, the level and duration of property tax abatement requested would require the developer to demonstrate extraordinary qualifications in lease summit according to their incentive policy. I mention this because Raymore's economic development policy, last amended in 2016, does not include similar hard number guidance. So I ask, if not here and now, where and when will you draw the line? Finally, I owe Mr. Burke and the school district an apology. An email I sent to his work address earlier today was an inappropriate use of school resources, and I applaud his prompt and clear defense of the same.
Thank you, sir. Next is Pam Hatcher.
Pam Hatcher, 1403 North Madison, Raymore, Missouri. I wanted to start by clarifying I am for development, both commercial and residential, which includes multifamily here in Raymore. For those of you who do not know me, I have over 35 years of real estate experience, 30 of those being specifically in commercial real estate. The last 5 have been in residential and commercial real estate. The reason I want to speak this evening in front of the city council members and the mayor is to be sure to again express my opinion about how the tax abatements are utilized within our city. This can be in the form of Chapter 100 bonds, TIFs, tax incentive financing, or CIDs, community improvement districts. The Chapter 100 bonds allow cities to purchase or construct certain types of projects with bond proceeds and to lease or sell the project to a company. These industrial development bonds may be issued either as a revenue bond or a general obligation bond. The Department of Economic Development for the state of Missouri strongly recommends that a city or a county obtain the endorsement of all taxing authorities before they offer any type of tax abatement to a company. It is not legally required procedure, but history has demonstrated it is a very good practice to prevent poor public relations and possible lawsuits. I adamantly oppose private residential or multifamily for-profit to be rewarded with tax breaks on the backs of working class and the senior citizens of our community. This project is not a senior housing, which is desperately needed in our community, and it's not affordable housing, which is also desperately needed. This project will not generate tax income from sales goods or services like a commercial project, which would have gone where this multifamily project is now slated to be built because the last remaining commercial plat has now been rezoned for this multifamily project. Last time I had checked, we were not handing out tax credits to single-family home builders. So what's the difference here? Why are we handing them out to an out-of-state multifamily home builder? As a matter of fact, single-family home builders, you are making pay cash for permits, you're making them pay cash for infrastructure, and many times you even make them make land donations for parks. Again, why is the red carpet being rolled out for the out-of-state multifamily developer? Are they giving us any land for the park? Are they making a donation for all-inclusive playground equipment somewhere? No. Instead, we, the taxpayers, are paying for them to come here. Yet they, again, do not provide any income from the sales or the goods of services. They do not provide hundreds of new jobs for us. What are we doing, and what precedent are you continuing to set with our tax-paying money? If this project included affordable housing or senior citizen housing, I may be standing here having a complete different statement to you all tonight. How does this housing project differ from any other housing project, especially when it doesn't really align with the industrial development bond defined? Eligible projects include factories, assembly plants, manufacturing plants, fabricating plants, distribution centers, warehouse buildings, office buildings, port terminals, facility, transportation, commercial, agricultural facilities, so on and so forth. Raymore specifically listed out what their bonds were for. It wasn't for multifamily. Again, I would request each of you to vote no for this. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, under personal appearances, is Mike Setzer.
Mayor, council people. I too have a serious question about this project. I agree with the previous two speakers. I'm also concerned about the impact on traffic. You put 300 more people at the end of Dean. One of the most dangerous intersections in this city is Dean and 58. There are wrecks there nearly every day, many of them serious because people fly down 58. 300 apartments, we're going to assume most of those people have jobs and they're all going to be out there at the same time every morning and evening trying to get to work, trying to get home. And Belton owns the other half of that street. Have we talked to them? Moving on, 23-year abatement. Most of the ones I've been familiar with were more like 10. 23 years is a long time to not pay taxes. I'd like to get one of those deals. Third item, has anyone researched this company? We looked on the internet, Google, 20 minutes, half an hour, and find people suing this firm everywhere. There's a company in Corpus Christi that's suing him over excavation work that he didn't pay for. It's in the court last month. There are lawsuits in Florida, lots of lawsuits in Florida, Indiana, Tennessee, the list goes on. They apparently have problems paying their subs, apparently have problems keeping their promises to the cities they've worked with. I would at least recommend that you table this motion tonight and have either the city attorney or an outside firm investigate this company before we hand them the keys to the city and a pocket of money. I think I've made my point. I hope I've made my point. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. And last on personal appearances, Donovan Jones. Mr. Jones.
Good evening, City Council, Mayor. Sorry, my printer. I'm bringing off the phone here. As many of you know me, my name's Donovan Jones. I reside at 507 Birchwood Court. I moved to Raymore in 1999. I came before you this evening to speak about the Watermark project. Not that I do not agree with development in our city, per se, but I do agree with growth. I do not agree with the way that this project's been handled and the issues that it brings to our city. I'm a graduate of Lee Summit High School and a graduate of Cass Career Center. I owned a large business in Lee Summit, and at that time I left Lee Summit, a city I was instrumental in building, to come to the city of Raymore for the school education system to better my future children. Over the past years of my residency in Raymore, many trials and tribulations arose in my life. With each one, I have grown stronger and more knowledgeable. These trials and tribulations are where my major frustration with the city comes today. What does the Watermark project bring to our city? Honestly, nothing. I'm not going to sit and talk about statistics, reports, firms that do case studies on developments. I'm coming to you as a local developer that the city is showing time and time again does not matter to them. I am the developer of the Deer Creek subdivision, development located on 58 Highway east of the middle school. I presented the city with a planned community for the area at the end of 2020. Our initial plan called for 55 residential homes, 3 to 7 acre lots, with large, nice homes, paved roads, and entry features. A portion of the property is in the Ray-Peck School District, while the other portion is in the Pleasant Hill School District. Our biggest argument was that the property was not inside the city limits. During the process with Cass County, we were to obtain support from all government bodies within a mile of our development. The city of Lake Winnebago was supportive of our project and provided a letter of support to Cass County. The city of Raymore is the only government body that opposed our development. My engineer and I especially begged the city for a meeting time and time again. James Cadrat was the only person in the city who was supportive of our plan. Our development, which I remind you was not within the city limits of Raymore, has been repeatedly denied. Jim Fearborn, the city manager, refused to even speak with me. I could not even get Mayor Turnbow to return most of my phone calls. I had to stop him while mowing his lawn, only for him to inform me there was nothing he could do, and even agreed after I agreed to sign the annexation agreement. Our project was supposed to bring 55 new homes to the neighborhood. Revenue from rooftops, homes ranging from $500,000 to $1 million. That equates to around $4,000 per house per year. Not to mention, Spire was going to bring a gas line up Ward Road to service our development plus a school, free of charge. All the roads that we were going to do were paved. It would help the school and the flow of traffic on 58. This is where I say, as you voted...
Sir, could you please restrict your remarks to the Watermark project? You've kind of veered off course.
How can our Raymore elected officials submit to a developer who has no long-term invested interest in our town? How can our city's elected officials give tax breaks to out-of-state developers? Every developer in the city and county is familiar with numbers. They comprehend them, they investigate them. That's what distinguishes them. When my partners and I looked at the exact same site in 2018, we had a local partner who brought this project to Raymore, which is Worcester Properties, and we were not offered one dime of tax incentive. If we were offered tax incentive for the exact same property to build an apartment complex, we would have done it. I fully understand the Chapter 100 tax structure. Again, developers who build large projects like this, like the Watermark development, understand them also. They charge to recover taxes. They charge in rent. Who suffers from the Chapter 100? The school district is the most. The children of our area. Apartment complexes do not create growth. Our schools create growth. Like I said, I moved here to this town because of our schools. Our superintendent is worried about saving the school because you want to take millions out of the district's budget. I come from the experience of developer. We're in the process of developing a 189 luxury unit apartment complex in Olathe. I did not ask Olathe for one tax dime. I want to be invested in their city. I'm also working right now on a 187 unit apartment complex in the city of Kansas City in a tax district. I asked my attorney last week to take us out of it. I will pay full taxes, so I again am invested in the city.
Mr. Jones, you've reached your 5 minutes. Thank you, sir. We appreciate your comments.
I will not.
I want to thank everybody that offered comments this evening. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your opinions. I'll now move on to staff reports. Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Carteret to make a report for Development Services.
Thank you, sir. Two quick items this evening. First, to speak on the calendar for our Planning and Zoning Commission. Their next meeting is Tuesday, the 21st of September. They'll consider two items. Alexander Creek, which is currently working on their next phase of development. As far as site work, they're coming in with their final plat, basically to create the layout, the final layout for sale of lots. And then the second item will be our annual review of our Unified Development Code. Then on October 5th, the Commission will hold a public hearing and consider the 2022 to 2026 capital improvement program that will then later be submitted to our council. And they'll also consider the site plan for Hawk Ridge Park, the west development of Hawk Ridge Park, which does require approval of the site plan by the Planning Commission. That's currently what's scheduled. The second item, I just want to indicate to the council, the city has hired a city planner that will begin Monday, September 20th. Dylan Eppert. Mr. Eppert comes to us through City of Peculiar. He was the city planner down at Peculiar most recently. And once he is here and on board, I'll bring him to a council meeting, so we'll have a formal introduction. But I wanted to let you know that we will have that person staffed beginning next Monday. So we're excited about that. That concludes staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Carteret. Anybody have any questions of Mr. Carteret? Moving right along, Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Mr. Carteret. I would ask Mr. Ryan Murdoch to make a report on COVID to the council this evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Tonight is just a very brief update on the state of the pandemic here within Raymore, kind of across the nation, but more than anything, it's an update on your all's weekly report that you get. You may have noticed this week that there is some data missing in terms of how many active cases we have within Raymore, long-term facility cases and the like. At the beginning of the pandemic, when the state of emergency was issued by the governor last year, there was an expiration date. It expired a couple of weeks ago, and with that was the expiration of the public safety list that was being provided by the Cass County Health Department to our dispatchers, so that our first responders, when they were responding to a call, would know whether or not they were going to have an interaction with somebody who might be COVID positive and risk exposure. As a result of that state of emergency actually being allowed to expire, that list is no longer provided to us, which means our first responders are no longer allowed or able to receive that kind of information. I did want to make sure that you understood that as a result, we can only tell you how many cases we are having essentially within Raymore each day. We will not know how many total active cases we have going on within the city right now. With that in mind, a little bit of data for you here provided from the Cass County Health Department. We have over 2,300 cases in Raymore since the beginning of the pandemic, and we've had 24 deaths here within the city of Raymore. If we were to look at the nation and our region and then come back to Cass County here, especially over about the last month, I just wanted to share the following with you, which is the 7-day average of cases across the country has now dropped substantially over the past few weeks and sits at about 120,000 cases a day in the United States. In Missouri, we've also seen a pretty substantial decline to about 2,000 cases a day, which is also down over the past month. However, I do want to say that that's not reflective of Cass County. And Cass County is currently seeing its highest case numbers since November of 2020 through January of 2021 over the past 4 weeks. Here in Raymore, we're seeing just about 50 cases on average a week over this past month. That's also an increase. And it should be noted that our school districts within the county now have nearly 900 people in quarantine, and I believe that they are now up to almost 200 positive cases since the beginning of the school year, which would also be one of the highest marks in the region. To finish up here, our COVID team, which did start meeting last year in March of 2020, and then when we saw a substantial decline last year, we did stop meeting on a weekly basis. We are meeting again on a weekly basis every Tuesday to discuss what is going on not only within Raymore but within the county, and also to discuss any events that are going on across the nation, whether it be legislative issues or any other medical issues that we can actually talk about in terms of mitigation efforts here within the city of Raymore. But more than anything tonight, I just wanted to make sure that you understood why your numbers may look a little different on your weekly report going forward, as we just will not get that information anymore. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have tonight.
Thank you, Ryan. I have one. So the county itself does not seem to, through their health department, promote vaccination events like I've seen in some other surrounding counties. Even though they might not have a great turnout, is there not an effort to promote events throughout the county?
I think that there is an effort, but I also think that they lack the manpower to do the true promotion that is necessary, the true dollars that the health department would need to make a substantial effort at promotion. So I don't think that they don't want to promote them. I do think that they want to promote them. I do continue to get updates from them through their social media accounts where they are trying to promote those particular events, but I think from a true dollars and cents and employee standpoint, they don't have the manpower to do more.
But they do receive the vaccinations on a substantial number enough that they could vaccinate a lot more folks.
They could, absolutely, and you could call tomorrow morning, pretty much anybody in the county, and you would be able to get in that day to get vaccinated.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Holman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Murdoch, excellent report. Are you aware of any efforts to try and reinstate the list, if you will? I know that Chief Zimmerman worked very hard on that during the opening days of COVID and was actually successful in getting that pushed through. I mean, that was certainly a very valuable tool, and it still would be today. I have certainly concerns, as I'm sure my colleagues do, about the health and safety of our first responders overall, as well as definitely our police officers here in town when they have to go into a house with without any kind of prior notification.
Yeah, so the first thing is you're absolutely right that it still would be very, very helpful. And you're also right that there was a lot of work that went into even getting that started within the county. As a result, not only of the state of emergency expiring, but back in 2020 when the list got started, Dr. Randall Williams, who at the time was the head of the DHSS, had issued an order to allow the public safety list to be created. That order also was allowed to expire, so it would essentially take, sir, going back and restarting the process at the state level to allow us to get the list going again. I don't think it would be out of the question, and Chief and I actually were talking about this probably a half hour ago, that the value that list actually does provide. And so I would hope that maybe we probably could get it restarted, maybe a little quicker since a lot of those discussions have already happened, especially since we're seeing numbers that are similar to late in the fall last year when it was most helpful.
Thank you.
Anyone else? But I think you would admit that late in the fall last year, the vaccination or the vaccine was not as readily available as it is today, and many of our first responders have received those vaccines, have they not?
I would assume some of our first responders have received the vaccine, but I don't want to speculate on the numbers who have actually received it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Fearborn?
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. Wanted to alert the council to the necessity that came to me last week to, on an emergency basis, which is allowed in the code, I had to actually make an $18,500 purchase without consulting the council. The situation that arose is at TB Hanna Park. And you may have noticed we've closed the spray ground as of last Friday. Turns out there are a lot of dead limbs, and we in the winds that we're having, we had several dead limbs in the 100-pound range falling down in that park while the park was being used. And fortunately, no one was hurt, but in the interest of health and safety, I did go ahead and sign an invoice to have both the 2 dead trees that are starting to rot removed because they're very tall, and some of these branches you can actually go there and see them. They're suspended, they've broken off, and they're just kind of caught up in other branches. So to basically have all of the tree work in that park cleaned up for the safety of the children who are playing over there. But I did want to alert you that I had authorized that emergency purchase last week, and they're beginning that work immediately.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Second item for your information this evening, next Monday, September 20th, will be a work session. 2 items currently on the agenda, of course, the budget discussion, and then once a year by code, the council, prior to the new fiscal year, has the opportunity to discuss your pay. And so both of those items will be on the agenda for next week.
Okay.
That concludes staff reports this evening, sir.
Thank you, sir. Anyone have any questions of Mr. Fearborn? All right, if there are none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. We have 2 items on the consent agenda this evening. I'd entertain a motion to dispose of those items.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
move that we approve consent agenda items A, City Council minutes, August 23rd, 2021, and items B, City Council minutes, special meeting minutes for August 30th, 2021.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yes, sir. I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Abstentions? 1 abstention. We have 6 yes and 1 abstention. Motion carries. Now move on to unfinished business. Could I please have the second reading of Bill 3647 by title only?
The second reading of Bill 3647 by title only, an ordinance approving a plan for a commercial development project.
There's no further discussion on this item. I'd entertain a motion to dispose of it.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
move that we approve the second reading of Bill 3647, Watermark Chapter 100 request.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Yes, sir. I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. The motion's been made and seconded to approve the second reading of Bill 3647. Is there any further discussion? Yes, Mr. Berenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We had some comments during the public comments section tonight regarding this watermark project. One of the members, or one of the people that commented was Mr. Setzer. He had mentioned some lawsuits and some legal action taken against the applicant. Can city comment on whether we had seen any of that in our research, or can legal counsel comment on whether any of this has been confirmed, or?
Councilman, I have not been asked to do research on this particular corporation. I have not done so from a national perspective for any pending lawsuits.
Okay.
My comment to it would be more than likely there is litigation out there. They're a huge company, and you don't get that big without having people sue you or suing other people in turn. But we have not looked into the details of any of the locations that were brought up this evening.
Mr. Mayor, can I make a motion?
You bet.
I'd like to motion that we table this and do spend a week or two.
Well, we have a pending motion.
Okay, we have a pending motion, sorry.
Can we amend the motion?
You could seek to amend the motion. It would take an amendment and then a second of the amendment, and you'd vote on that amendment.
So would you care to amend the primary motion?
I'd like to amend the primary motion to change
to approve it. And so your amendment would be to table the item.
This until our legal counsel could look into that and make sure that those complaints are either untrue or we can have some information on that.
Okay, so the motion would be to table the motion until further investigation has been performed on the accusation of pending litigation?
Yes, sir.
Is there a second?
I would like to second that motion, please.
Motion's been made and seconded to amend the first motion to table it for further investigation. Is that all right?
That's correct. Discussion on that motion? Or
there's no discussion on a tabling motion.
That's true.
So I would go ahead and, those in favor? 2 yes. Any opposed? 4 opposed, 5 opposed. Motion fails. We'll now revert to the primary motion, which is the motion to approve the second reading of Bill 3647. Any further discussion? Mr. Holman.
Question for staff. Mr. Fearborn, have any of the facts from the first reading and vote on this issue changed at all?
None, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I feel like I need to do this since Councilwoman Abdel-Gawad is not here. A lot of times she takes the role of a teacher to try to explain some of the situations. I want to ask a clarifying question of staff that will maybe address some of the concerns. It is my understanding on page 46 of the packet where it says summary of cost-benefit analysis. I need to put my glasses back on. There is a chart that shows the projected tax revenues without abatement, and that's 8 million, and it's written there, 8,846,000. And there's a line that says real property tax abatement next to it, and then there's the payment in lieu of taxes line on the end. If you add those two numbers from the last two columns on the right and in the middle, they exactly to the dollar match all of the numbers in the left-hand column that says projected tax revenues without abatement. So am I interpreting it correctly, thinking that they will pay the taxes that are abated in the one column, the 4.932 million, and they will also pay payment in lieu of taxes over the course of this that is equal to and I'm only looking at the Rapex Schools line, sorry, to clarify, I apologize, since I know you don't have it in front of you. But when you add those two, the payment in lieu of taxes over the course of this time, it seems to me that those two equal the projected tax revenues without abatement to the dollar in every column all the way down. I did what, 4 math problems, 8 math problems today on this. Is that a correct interpretation?
That would be accurate, sir.
Okay. So it seems like if we had no abatement, the Ray-Pec School District would get 8.8 million, and I won't do the rest of the numbers. And with tax abatement, over the time, they will get $8.84 million. Isn't that correct?
In real property, sir. That is correct.
In real property, okay. I also looked at another aspect of this, and I divided the deficit of the $1,018,928 that the district mentioned last time. And so I divided it over the course of the 24 years, and it would be equivalent to $41,621 a year. The current salary for a first-year teacher at Ray-Pec is $38,400. I've been looking at the district's finances for 23 years as the treasurer of the teachers union, wanting to know in years that we got frozen, why they couldn't use the reserves. In years that my wife was reduced in force, about 10 other teachers were reduced. And I looked at so I've been looking at these funds for a lot of years before I had any involvement here. That $41,000 that they would be losing a year wouldn't pay for a single first-year teacher at Lee Summit or Belton. I just wanted to put that out. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? There's no further discussion. All those in favor of the motion? 6 yes, opposed, 1 no, and 1 absent. Motion carries. Could I please have the second reading of Bill 3646 by title only?
The second reading of Bill 3646 by title only, an ordinance authorizing and directing the issuance, sale, and delivery of $9 million principal amount of general obligation bonds, Series 2021, of the City of Raymore, Missouri, and authorizing certain other documents and actions by the city.
Thank you. I know this is a second reading, but do we have an update that you'd like to give, Mr. Fearborn?
We do, sir, because the sale took place today. So as you can see behind me, we have our general bond issuance dream team. So I will ask them to make the presentation on this.
Mr. Goffey, how are you this evening?
Evening, Mayor, Council. Good to see you all. When Mr. Fearborn said Dream Team, I immediately looked to the right at the representatives from Gilmore and Bell that are with us tonight. So for your consideration is the final reading of the bond ordinance, which Sid and Sarah have prepared. And so if you have questions on the ordinance itself, they'll be glad to address those. I think in front of you is both a clean copy of the ordinance as well as a marked version that shows the changes from the bond sale which did occur earlier today. At 10:30 this morning, we did do a competitive sale of the bonds, $9 million of bonds, and received 7 bids. We were estimating an interest rate of about 1.75%, and the low true interest cost was 1.73%. So right in line with our expectations. Keep in mind, this is a 20-year bond issue, and your average cost is basically 1.73%. So very, very low. The bids ranged on the 7 bids that were received ranged from 1.73% to 2.07%. So a little bit of a range, but the first few responses that came in were grouped more closely towards the 1.73%. So we feel that is really where the market was for the bonds. The closing date, assuming approval tonight, is scheduled for September 29th, at which time the bond proceeds will be wired into the city's account. We do have, these are bonds that you may recall were voted about a year ago, August of 2020. There were 2 ballot questions, one for parks, one for streets. And after this issuance, there will be about 5.5 million of bonds remaining. So,
That was actually June of 2020,
right.
but who's counting?
So the remaining bonds will be issued at some point next year. We're working on trying to identify projects and timelines and kind of match that up accordingly. And then one item that I would kind of give you an update on, just kind of moving forward. As you may know, cities have a constitutional limit on the amount of general obligation bonds that can be voted. That's 20% of your assessed valuation. And then that 20% is comprised of 2 10% categories. One is an unrestricted category, which you can use for any municipal purpose. The other category is restricted only for streets and stormwater. And that remaining capacity after this series of bonds, as well as the remaining 5.5 million, is about 43.6 million in total. And then that category is broken down 28.5 million for the unrestricted purpose, and then 15.1 million remaining for the streets and the stormwater purpose. So I'll stop there, see whatever questions you might have. If you've got questions on the ordinance, Sid and Sarah will be glad to address those.
Jim, did you want to add to that at all?
No, sir. I think it was complete.
Done very well. That's what the report is saying, so I appreciate that. Any questions of Mr. Goffey or Mr. Douglas? Thank you, sir. There's no further discussion. I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we approve the second reading of Bill 3646, General Obligation Bond, General Obligation Series 2021 bond issue.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. The motion's been made and seconded to approve the second reading of Bill 3646. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. We'll now move on to new business. Could I please have the first reading of Bill 3650 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3650 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, amending the zoning map from C2 General Commercial District to PUD Planned Unit Development District, an 8-acre tract of land located south of Lucy Webb Road, west of Dean Avenue in Raymore, Cass County, Missouri.
Thank you. Is there a staff report? By the way, this does require a public hearing. I will open the public hearing at this time and ask for a staff report. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. I would ask Mr. Cataret to make a staff report on this item.
Thank you, sir. Mako Development Company has submitted a request to reclassify the zoning of 8 acres of land within the Good Ranch development. Property is located south of Lucy Webb to the west of Dean Avenue. This 8 acres does not touch Dean Avenue. It's actually it touches the interstate highway south of Lucy Webb Road. The request is to reclassify the property from its current C2 General Commercial District designation to Planned Unit Development. Since it is a rezoning request, it does require a public hearing. Was advertised for this evening. I need to enter into the record the notices that were sent to all the adjoining property owners within 185 feet. Notice of publication in the Journal, our Unified Development Code, the application submitted, our growth management plan, staff report submitted to you this evening, the preliminary plan, and resident emails concerning the request. The rezoning would allow for the proposed Ridgeview Estates development. This would be a 60-unit age-restricted and income-restricted senior housing development. I want to note that when you request the planned unit development zoning designation, it does require a concurrent submittal of a preliminary plan. As I mentioned, the property is part of the Good Ranch. It's actually upon what's referred to as Tract 1 in the Good Ranch, and it's had its commercial zoning designation since 2002. The rezoning request required a good neighbor meeting. It was actually held July 28th. And the questions and comments from the Good Neighbor meeting are included in the packet. I do want to note, prior to that meeting, the developer actually met specifically with residents of the Meadows and Meadowwood subdivisions, which are directly across the street. That was not an official city meeting, but it was an important meeting because there were 100 residents there to listen to the developer's presentation and be able to ask questions. So I wanted to point that out. So they've made a couple of attempts to try to inform the public of what is being proposed. When we look at this specific tract, again, currently it is planned for commercial development. One thing that I'd like to point out with the Good Ranch is, for the most part, they've adhered to the master plan for the development, but there have been changes. In fact, the Meadows and Meadowwood subdivisions were both initially intended to be attached single family, so they were supposed to be a higher density development. It was going to be a land use transition from Stonegate, Wood Creek single family to the Meadowwood and Meadows, then eventually to the commercial. Those tracts are now obviously single family residential development. So there has been some change within the planning for that northern part of the Good Ranch development. And over the past probably 20 years, staff has had several discussions with the developer about the future of Tract 1. How do we envision, how does the city envision that to be developed? How do they envision it to be developed? And we've had a lot of discussion about, obviously with the interchange portion of that property, obviously commercial development is our key objective. But it's a very large tract of land, and I provided one example in the staff report that shows what we the staff presented along with the developer as far as, well, what really could happen within this particular area. And I don't think any of us feel that commercial development would occur at that midpoint between the 58 interchange and the Cass County interchange, and felt that residential development of some density level above single family would be most appropriate. This was just one concept plan that we identified, but it does show the intent was to have a attached single family style development on the north part of this tract of land. And I mentioned Tract 1, again, it's 143 acres in size. A considerable amount of commercial land to be developed. I mentioned this particular piece of the property has been zoned for almost 20 years. Absolutely no interest in commercial development on the north part of this tract. All the interest is on the south half of the tract. I mentioned the PUD zoning and the preliminary plan. That's important because what gets shared with the residents, what was shared with you tonight on the preliminary plan, it's kind of what you see is what you get. So they are locked into that preliminary plan that's been submitted to you as part of this proposal this evening, and it can only be modified by going back through the process. If they want to change the style of development, the number of units, anything of that nature, it does have to come back through the process. And also the PUD specifically allows us to limit what uses are allowed here. And the only use that is allowed is an age-restricted 55-plus community on this property. So once it gets zoned PUD, if this developer doesn't move forward, the land stays zoned PUD, but the only thing that could go in there is a age-restricted senior development that matches the preliminary plan that is also submitted with this proposal this evening. In your packet, I also included an example. I thought it was very similar to what they're proposing here this evening, the Meadows of Perryville. It's just got similar architectural style to what they're proposing here this evening. The access to the property as part of the preliminary plan is to be gained off of Prairie Grass Drive, which would be an extension to the west to serve not only this development but future development to the south. There's no direct access onto Dean Avenue or onto Lucy Webb Road from this development. There will be a emergency fire access, but the only entrance is off of Prairie Grass Drive. And I did include a copy of the Memorandum of Understanding that's been prepared for this subdivision as part of the packet. The Public Works Department has submitted a memorandum regarding the provision of facilities to this property. The Planning Commission submitted proposed findings of fact, and it was at their August 17th meeting that they voted 8-0 to forward this request for rezoning to the city council with a recommendation of approval. There was one condition that we needed to modify the MOU to add the restriction that all the residents must be 55 or older. That has been completed. This evening, Mr. Dan Sanders, who's representing Mako, is here this evening for give you a brief presentation that I will broadcast to your computers. Also here this evening is the project engineer, Kyle Miller. And I did include the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting, so you see those discussion points that the Planning and Zoning Commission had. That will conclude staff report, sir.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of staff at this time? You can always return for those questions if they pop up. Yes, Mr. Burke.
This is kind of an unimportant question, but there's that little triangle of land right to the north of it in between Harmon Road and the highway. Is that owned by MoDOT or is that?
That's right of way, yes.
Okay, thank you. I just thought that probably would never be able to be developed because it's kind of a tiny little, but fortunately it's owned by someone else. Thank you.
Mr. Berenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Carteret, to the right of this property between the proposed apartment complex and the Good Ranch subdivision, under this PUD, if somebody develops that other tract of land in there that's now being proposed as vacant still, did they have, I'm assuming they don't have to follow any of our codes as far as buffering or transitioning into something like a duplex. I guess the question I'm asking is can a developer in the future build an apartment complex there as well under this PUD?
The PUD would only be for the 8 acres. Okay. That's part of this plan. The land to the west adjacent to Dean Avenue still zoned commercial. In fact, if that property developed commercially, they would have to create a buffer to buffer for the residential units. The same with anything that would happen currently under the commercial zoning to the south.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There's nothing further. I'll turn to the developer and see if they wish to make any comments and for your presentation this evening.
Jim, you're going to have for me to put it up on the... Mayor and council members, thank you for allowing me to address you this evening. My name is Dan Sanders. I am with Mako Development Company, 111 North Main Street, Clarkton, Missouri is our corporate address. And I'm here, as Jim pointed out, with Kyle Miller of Crockett Engineering, the civil engineer for this development. I'm here to ask you to consider our request to rezone an approximate 8-acre site south of Lucy Webb Road and west of Dean Avenue from C2 to PUD. If this rezoning is approved, and we are approved by the Missouri Housing Development Commission for financing and tax credits, our plans are to develop Ridgeview Estates, a 60-unit, single-story senior community. This is a low-density development of 7.5 units per acre. As Jim pointed out, access to this development would be via an extension of Prairie Grass Drive from Dean Avenue that will end in a cul-de-sac near the western edge of our property and near I-49. Ridgeview Estates is marketed exclusively to and restricted to senior residents age 55 and older, and this age requirement will be recorded as part of a land use restriction agreement that was recorded with the deed and as agreed to in the memorandum of understanding with the city of Raymore. On July 8th, as Jim noted, we held a meeting with the neighbors from the Meadows and the Meadowwood of Good Ranch. We had over 100 people there. And the neighborhood, they actually, a member of the neighborhood toward the end of the meeting stood up and asked for a vote. It was overwhelming support of what we're trying to propose here. Actually, the development, they all wanted us to actually do the site that was closer to them too and eventually make that into senior housing too. But yes, and everything we've had has been positive from the neighbors in that area. So we are, very grateful to the people, and they thought that this would be an ideal addition to their community. We build quality homes. We're long-term owners. At Ridgeview, each apartment will have washers and dryers, range, microwave, refrigerator, dishwasher, garbage disposal, central heat and air. and they'll all be 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 955 square feet of living space, and 26 square feet access off of the back patio for storing their barbecue grill and their outdoor chairs. The outdoor areas on the site will have attractive landscaping. The common grounds will be enhanced with a gazebo, picnic area, park benches. The single-story garden-style apartments will be attractively designed, and we do brick and vinyl exteriors. We build these apartments to be as maintenance-free as possible. A large community building for the residents will include a kitchen, serving area, commercial workout equipment, furnished living room area, office, and storage. Net rents are approximately $650 a month. We'll have 9 special needs units for physically and handicapped individuals. They'll rent for $480 a month. And we'll have 9 apartments that are completely unrestricted market rate units at $800 a month. Residents will pay their electricity. The property will pay for water, sewer, trash, and all maintenance. To help reduce energy costs for the residents, the National Association of Home Builders Green Building Standards will be incorporated into the design and construction of these apartments. These are affordable, market-quality homes for seniors who are on a fixed income. This is not project-based Section 8 housing. These are limited on income to residents, 2 people, $41,580 a year, and $36,420 for the single residents. But again, that's income. It is not assets. The remaining slides in the PowerPoint are just to show you the quality we build into our apartments. And we are long-term owners. The company is a family-owned company, a Missouri-based company. We've been doing this since the 1970s, and we have rehabbed and completely refurbished many of our apartments that we have built back originally. We've built other areas in the Kansas City area. We're not a urban developer. We're more suburban, more rural developer. But we've built in Kearney and Independence and communities that are close to you there. We'd be glad for anybody that was interested in going to any of those developments to provide you access to them. And these are just typical how we finish our community buildings. This is in Sedalia, Missouri. This was an old school that we historically rehabbed, and it's a senior community. That's part of the gym that we completely refurbished and made into their community room. We do libraries, computer centers, exercise equipment. Exterior, like I say, we do own these for the long term, so we want them to be as maintenance-free as possible. This is in Kearney, Missouri, Eastwood Apartments, 55 units. We're just finishing another 50 apartments in Kearney. We had a waiting list of over 80 people at this apartments. We've already got the new one that we're pulling COs on the first 18 units next week. The entire development is already pre-leased as soon as we're completed.
Could I ask you real quick, are those MHDC projects as well?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
And that's the community building there in Kearney. This is in Independence. This is off Salisbury Road in Independence, Missouri. These are duplexes. We've also done a second phase in Independence. This one leased up immediately, and the second phase, which we built just north of the Truman Museum, and it's completely leased up. They're immediately, the seniors are waiting for these units. There is a huge need for affordable senior apartments. These are just other units that we've built in other areas. Again, that's in Independence. I just wanted to show you the type of quality that we do in these apartments. So I'd be glad to answer any questions.
So I noticed that in the drawings for this particular project, you had no garages, but the Independence project does. Any different? What's the difference between the two projects?
We typically don't do, we do in certain conditions, but sometimes we don't do them because a lot of it's got to do right now with construction prices so high, and this is a limited and scarce resource, the Missouri Housing Development Commission tax credits. And I mean, what everybody has done in the last 2 years on our construction costs has really greatly hampered what we can do and stay affordable. So that's more than anything due to the restrictions on this one. I will point out too, we do go in, we do put out for local developers to bid, local subcontractors. So we do come into the community and try to use the community resources.
Any questions this time? Mr. Townsend?
I did. During your presentation, if you could highlight the ones, and the mayor asked it also, but I'm kind of lost in the slideshow. If you could specifically address which ones that you're presenting to us are MHDC units that you have in place, so that I kind of
These are all affordable.
All of the photos are.
These all are affordable, whether they're in Missouri or in another state. They're all done under the tax credit program.
They're all.
Yes.
Okay, so all the photos we've seen tonight are from your existing MHDC projects. Okay.
MHDC or the agency in the other state, which is the
Or
same
that
as
state's version.
MHDC.
Okay.
So this particular project that you've got on the screen right now would not be something that you would pursue here because of the construction costs involved?
Currently, yes. Hopefully in the future, we can come back and try to do a second phase and do some garages, but our construction costs have just, as everybody's has, it just went through the roof the last couple of years during COVID.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Berenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would there be covered parking, or if not, is that something that could be added in the future for the residents?
There won't be.
Won't be.
I can't say that we will, because it just, again, once our budgets go in, they're pretty well set budgets.
And then secondly, the high school in Sedalia, that's the Smith Cotton High School. Yeah,
That's the old Lincoln Hubbard High School.
Okay, I thought it was the Smith Cotton
No,
one,
that's
but
the
okay.
old Lincoln Hubbard.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, sir.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Is this a public hearing on this particular item? I would entertain any comments from the public that would like to address this project at this time, or this rezoning request. I'll ask again if anybody wishes to comment. Seeing no one come forward, I will close the public hearing at this time, and we'll open it for discussion. Does anyone have any additional questions of staff or the developer before we move on? Mr. Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Cataract, earlier in the conversation tonight in the presentation, there was a discussion about the parcel of land to the west, to the east, as you're looking at it going north, of the proposed rezoning property, and that could possibly be commercial, but it's the growth management plan, our vision for this particular corridor of our city. We're looking to hopefully have a transitional approach to how this particular portions of land is built out. With this particular rezoning tonight, we have the low-density multifamily piece. Hopefully, depending on how this moves forward in other ventures, the adjacent properties were similarly appointed and rezoned in that capacity. So should a developer come forward for that particular portion of land to want to do commercial, would there be conversations at that time to kind of address the future concerns the future vision that we have for this particular area?
If somebody would, of course, the zoning of the property, the plan for the property remains commercial at the hard corner where the roundabout is, and along, and even south along Dean Avenue. It certainly is a more viable commercial tract than the 8 acres we're talking about this evening, again, being on the hard corner. We certainly would entertain a commercial development, and any development that goes there is going to have to come in with the necessary transition for the residential uses. If this project moves forward, we will have to transition any commercial or office or professional development. We don't see this to be a prime retail site. If it's going to go commercial, it'll be some type of office, some type of assisted living facility, something along that nature. Again, looking at the character of the area, we wouldn't rule out a commercial development, but not likely to be a high traffic retail commercial center. That's going to be more along the North Cass Parkway area. So
outstanding. That was exactly what I was hoping to hear, just because of as you stated, the surrounding community, that corner in particular, and then just a natural progression into the what I call the more higher volume business traffic that would occur as you move further south along that particular parcel of land. So I would agree with the rezoning for a family in this particular area, maintaining the vision that we have for this area going forward in that aspect. So I think that's my questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Your Honor, may I dovetail off of that?
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Mr. Fearborn. Hold on a second.
The MHDC component of this, as we always do with the council, will be coming before you in your work session on October 4th. And then the actual request for a letter of support, you all will remember how that works. So they'll be appearing before you on October 4th to further elaborate on that particular component of this. Again, tonight the only thing that is before you is low density 55 plus PUD and that the rezoning that's associated with that.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Fearborn.
Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the most appropriate person for my question is Mr. Zur. With the 55 and older restriction, I wondered how restrictive it is. My mother lives in Independence in a very similar facility, and there are neighbors that came and moved in with their mother or grandmother. Well, actually, based on the two people there, one's grandmother and mother, but and then the grandmother, the owner of the property, passed away, and the people have been living there for several years while probate goes on. Is that legal?
It does happen. It happens when there is not a really tightly written restrictive covenant that goes onto the property. You also have to understand, of course, that it will be up to the individual property owners for enforcement of that as well. So if they find out, there are provisions that would allow for injunctive relief through the local circuit court to say, hey, you're in violation of these restrictive covenants and therefore you need to exit the property or remove yourself so that only 55 and older are able to participate.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Holman.
A question for Mr. Carteret. I'm assuming there is not a master developer for this corridor at this time. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
Okay. I know this piece of land has been in discussion with the city for quite some time, even before we had the development to the south and those kinds of things. And we feel very strongly that there's going to be retail interest, especially on the southern portion of this, as you mentioned before. The zoning seems to make sense. I'm not sure if the project fits the exact area as well. I guess we'll be addressing that maybe later on, at least partially tonight, but more in detail as we go forward. So you answered my question, sir. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Circo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I noticed while we were discussing that, Mr. Maddox, you were kind of shaking your head no. I didn't know if you wanted to address that or if it's okay. Is that proper or no?
Sure.
I mean, he was.
Go ahead.
Under fair housing, under the Older Persons Act, we will elect, and it will be the 55 and older, and all residents there, anybody there has to be 55 and older. There are, under the senior, what you can do is 55 and older for 80% or more, and the other 20% do not have to meet that age requirement. This, per our MOU and our land use restriction, everybody has to be 55 and older. The leases are required that they can have like grandchildren visiting, but they're limited like to 2 weeks for the entire year. And I mean, so yes, they can have grandchildren but they can't have them move in and actually live there.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Zur, if you'll recall at the zoning hearing with P&Z, I brought up the fact that the placement of this, which is probably part of the preliminary plat discussion rather than the rezoning discussion, which the board was unanimously in favor of, does prohibit the extension of the outer road. And I think the developer said that that was upon recommendation of staff for placement of this particular project. But that would that continue to be part of the discussion at the preliminary plat discussion? Because I still have some concerns about the placement of this and it prohibiting the extension of the outer road for any purposes of commercial development access along the highway.
Yeah, you will have the opportunity to review that as part of the preliminary plat.
But that would require, as Mr. Carteret said earlier,
a significant change from this.
reconsideration of the entire project.
That's correct, in which case it would be potentially bounced back down.
But not through zoning. Zoning would already be passed.
That's correct.
It would just be the preliminary plat section. Okay, all right.
I think Mr. Carteret may want to chime in on that one as well.
Just point of clarification, the zoning here being the planned unit development includes the preliminary plat. So what was submitted in your packet, sometimes I often refer to them as conceptual plans. In this case, it actually is the preliminary plat.
Okay.
So any decisions on access and that does need to be made as part of this discussion this evening. As far as discussion regarding the extension of the outer road, because staff had that discussion initially with this developer, with Good Otis, with our economic development director. We're all part of that discussion on, does it make sense to continue the outer road? Does it make sense, make that all the way down to North Cass Parkway? What do we do with that? And I think the decision at that time was that it didn't have a tremendous amount of benefit to have a frontage road along the interstate there. That Dean Avenue was in fact where we wanted the main access to be off of. We liked the extension of Prairie Grass Drive and then have an access to a development to the south, but didn't feel that the outer road itself needed to go all the way through the property. That was just a discussion we had so at that time, and so when at Planning Commission, when they said the developer was against it, it really was a combination of all of us talking through that we felt the better access was off of Dean Avenue.
It still concerns me that in the master plan, of which you provided a copy on page 13 of your report, it does show an outer road continuing into the center of the property, joining a circle drive as it reaches the wider portion of the pork chop, so to speak. So I don't know. I know I'm not a voting member here, but I still have some concerns about that plan being so different from what's being proposed this evening.
And if I may, Mr. Mayor, one additional comment that I did talk about. Topography has a lot to play with that. This property, I don't know if I mentioned in the staff report, it slopes, over 50 feet from the interstate down to Dean Avenue.
Yeah.
That was part of the discussion as well as to how do we work a frontage road in with that change in topography? Do we, again, when you look at the drawing, yes, I did include this. This is one of the early versions that we started talking about, two-dimensional. When you start looking at how this plan fits on the topography of the site, it just doesn't really work.
Okay,
and it
that
didn't
helps.
really explain through that probably fair enough at the Planning Commission either. But.
Okay, all right. Thank you. No, that makes sense. I appreciate that. Anybody else have anything? If not, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Townsend.
Get my place here. I move that we approve the first reading of Bill 3650, rezoning of Ridgeway Estates.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3650. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. May I please have the first reading of Bill 3651 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3651 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing the city manager to take all necessary steps required to terminate and remove as an encumbrance on the public record the memorandum of understanding for Parkside subdivision as entered into between the city and Parkside LLC.
Could I have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Your Honor, and I would preface the staff report by saying this is kind of a first for staff to be terminating items like this that are in place. So it may be kind of a joint report with some questions, but I'll call on Mr. Carteret to make the first part. Mr. Zur was intimately involved in the termination components of this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. At your December 14, 2020 meeting, Council entered into a memorandum of understanding with Joe Duffy, who represented Parkside LLC, regarding the proposed Parkside subdivision. And as you may recall, Parkside subdivision is a 320-lot single-family subdivision located south of Creekmore, south of the 163rd Street, and to the west of North Madison Street. Mr. Duffy and Parkside LLC is no longer affiliated with the Parkside subdivision, and the MOU should be terminated. Bill 3651 does authorize the mutual termination of the MOU. Parkside LLC, Mr. Duffy, is in agreement with the termination of the MOU. As Mr. Fearborn indicated, this is step one. We are following up. The next agenda item establishes a new MOU for the Parkside subdivision under the new ownership group. So that concludes staff report.
Thank you. I know we don't get a lot of change of ownerships on pieces of property like that in the middle of something, but it is unique. Appreciate that. Anybody have any questions? Oh, we'll move on to Mr. Zur. Mr. Zur.
I would simply echo what Mr. Cataract had provided in reading through the original MOU. It was a recorded document, so it's been placed as an encumbrance against the property. In the language of the MOU for the assignment, it doesn't really make a clear assignment language for a new property owner, at least given the point of the development. So our view of this was in order to remove it as an encumbrance on the public record so we don't have two similarly situated MOUs, we simply terminate the one and have the second one that gets potentially adopted right after this one with the new developer.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Cataract or Mr. Zur? If not, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
move that we approve the first reading of Bill 3651, termination of memorandum of understanding with Parkside LLC.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yes, sir. I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3651. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Could I please have the first reading of Bill 3652 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3652 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing the city manager to enter into a memorandum of understanding for the Parkside subdivision.
Thank you. Is there a staff report?
Thank you, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Cataract to make a staff report on this agenda item.
Thank you, sir. Dan Carr, who's representing Triangle 2 LLC and Triangle 4 LLC, has purchased the 155 acres comprising the Parkside subdivision and does desire to proceed with the approval process for the subdivision. A memorandum of understanding reflecting the new property ownership has been prepared, and it does mirror the initial MOU that was prepared for the subdivision. There is consistency between the new property owner and the previous one through the engineering company that was utilized for the Parkside subdivision. And from our discussions with Mr. Carr, the subdivision, there may be a couple of minor tweaks, but will relatively remain the same as what was initially approved. I did ask Mr. Carr to be here this evening, if it's okay, Mr. Mayor, to come forward to introduce himself to the council, that if council had questions of him and his plans, at that time he'll be prepared.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Dan Carr. I live at 8611 North Donald Lane, Kansas City, Missouri. I've been developing property around the country and around Kansas City for about 35 years, and super excited to get down here in Raymore and get this project started. There is with Joe Duffy. Actually, Joe Duffy was a partner of mine. Joe's 78 years old and basically just elected that didn't want to get into another project that's going to take multiple years. So I want to move forward, and I closed on the property about a month ago. We've got plans in that are being tweaked right now. We want to make a really special development there because of where it sits between the park and the golf course and everything. So we're making some changes, minor changes to it that really we think will enhance the neighborhood. So we're excited to get that started, and I just wanted to introduce myself to the council and let you know who I am.
Thank you, sir. Anybody have any questions? Mr. Burke.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask, and I got just part of what you said helped me understand your experience and background, and I appreciate that. But I, contrary to earlier comments, I do research companies that I've never worked with before. I know in 2015 when I started. I bugged the heck out of Mr. Fairborn all the time. But I looked up, Triangle 2 LLC, and it was created a year, just short of 4 days, under a year, according to what I've found. And the one thing that I have a question about is it talks about adding and removing people from the LLC, and I will tell you I'm not very versed in how this works, but like on 9/17 of 2020, they added Robert De La Fuente, and then October 20 added Andrew Gaya, or if I'm saying that right, and then yourself as well. And then in November of 2020, they removed Robert De La Fuente and then removed Andrew, but then that was in 21. But then in March of this year, we added Andrew back to the group. It just seemed interesting.
Yeah, so great research, by the way. So that whole project, I live up in the Liberty area, and we did a large TIF project there about 15 years ago, called the Liberty Triangle, Hy-Vee, Lowe's, the whole development. Very successful project. TIF's paid off in less than 15 years. So, it's just a great project. So we had 3 partners in that. I was a third partner of it, and I had 2 other partners in it. And what we did here over the last 6 months is one partner took some of the properties, I took some of the properties, and so we just divided up the properties. And so I have 4 or 5 commercial properties there, and the other partner's got some other commercial properties. And so the name's a little bit confusing because we had to put them all into different LLCs when we did that. And so once that happened, we did it, if you understand real estate, we did a 1031 tax deferred exchange, and that's when I bought the ground down here. When I sold and exchanged some of that property, I ended up buying this ground down here. So I know it's confusing.
Thanks.
And the name's a little crazy, but
it was hard to find.
There's a lot of details.
Especially the comma after the 4 on Triangle 4. That threw me. But
yeah, I mean,
found it eventually.
Local projects, the one that was just announced, and you've probably didn't pick up the name. U.S. Federal Properties is my company. We were just awarded the FBI project up at the airport. It's about a $50 million development up there that we're going to be doing. So, we're really active in the market here and around the country. But this project is pretty special. I think we can really do something nice down here.
Appreciate the further introduction.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Ullman.
Thank you, Your Honor. Possible disqualifying question, sir. Are you related to Derek Carr?
Not that I'm aware of.
That's fine, sir. Thank you.
Is he from Ireland?
Quarterback for the Raiders.
Anyone else? Okay. Anything else from staff on this?
That includes staff reports, sir.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further questions of staff, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we approve Bill 3652, Memorandum of Understanding, Triangle 2 LLC and Triangle 4 LLC, Parkside Subdivision.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Ullman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3652. Any further discussion? Mr. Burke.
Question on page, this is for staff, question on page 153, where it talks about number 2, pedestrian improvements. A lot of times when we talk about trails and things, we mention the materials that the trails are going to be made of. Is there any knowledge of what materials? Are these dirt trails? Are they paved trails? Are they asphalt trails?
These would be paved trails.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Could I please have the first reading of Bill 3653 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3653 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing the city manager to notify Parkside LLC of breach and to take all necessary steps required to either satisfy any reimbursement requirements and/or terminate the reimbursement agreement entered into between the city and Parkside LLC.
Thank you. Is there a staff report?
I'd ask Mr. Carteret and Mr. Zur to make a staff report on this item.
Okay.
Or maybe just Mr. Zur?
No, I apologize. I was looking at something else. At its April 26, 2021 meeting, council entered into a reimbursement agreement with Joe Duffy, representing Parkside LLC. This was regarding the design of the proposed extension of Sunset Lane and the connection of 163rd Street through the Parkside subdivision. Again, Parkside LLC is no longer affiliated with the subdivision, and the reimbursement agreement should be terminated. And this bill would authorize the mutual termination of the design reimbursement agreement. Parkside LLC is in agreement with the termination, and a new reimbursement agreement has been prepared with the new ownership group. Some of the work has been started by the engineering firm under the initial reimbursement agreement. No reimbursements have been paid. Again, with the continuity of the engineering firms being the same, with the new reimbursement agreement would pick up with the design work that's been done through its completion. So staff does recommend approval of this. Concludes staff report.
Thank you. Mr. Zura?
Your Honor, I have nothing further to provide to that staff report.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of staff? If not, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
move that we approve Bill 3653, termination of Sunset Lane, 163rd Street Extension Design Reimbursement Agreement.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion,
Thank you, Mr. Holman. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3653. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. Can I please have the first reading of Bill 3654 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3654 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing the city manager to enter into a street design reimbursement agreement with Triangle 2 LLC and Triangle 4 LLC to design a portion of the extension of Sunset Lane.
Thank you. Is there a staff report?
Thank you, sir. I would ask Mr. Carteret to make a staff report on this item.
Thank you, sir. Bill 3654 proposes the new reimbursement agreement with the new ownership group for Parkside LLC. Other than the ownership identification, all the language within the reimbursement agreement remains the same, and again, the engineering firm remains the same.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of staff? Mr. Zur, did you have anything to add? Nope. Good to go?
Your Honor, I'm good to go with this one. I'd simply note that for future references for reimbursement agreements, we'll likely be working with staff in order to put in some assignment language that may be helpful for avoiding this in the future.
All right. Thank you. Any questions of staff? If there's no further questions, I'd entertain a motion to dispose of this item.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we approve the first reading of Bill 3654, reimbursement agreement Triangle 2 LLC and Triangle 4 LLC, Sunset Lane, 163rd Street Design.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second the motion, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. The motion's been made and seconded to approve the first reading of Bill 3654. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Motion carries unanimously, 7-0. So that brings us to the public comment section. If anyone would like to address the council at this time, please step forward, state your name and address for the record, and keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. See no one coming forward, so I will move on to the Mayor Council Communications. And Mr. Serco, I'll start with you tonight, sir.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess to start off with, congratulations to Erica Hill. Great certification. Does a lot of training, a lot of classes. I know going through all those stuff takes a lot of hours. It shows your dedication and your love for your job, for the city and what you do. really big congratulations for that. That's an accomplishment that just shows your expertise in your field and how much you want it and how much you enjoy it. Basically, not much more. It was a long night, so that's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Will Scherzer.
I wanted to say thank you to Ryan for the update on the COVID information, and I do think that it would be extremely valuable to restart the list so we can make sure that our fire department and our police officers are safe, for sure. I also wanted to say congratulations to Ms. Hill on obtaining her MRCC sustaining certification. And lastly, I wanted to state that my reasoning for seconding the motion was because I feel that it's important that we know who we're working with. I feel that city staff does do an excellent job researching and communicating with us about what they find. However, I just figured it wouldn't be a bad idea to look further into the legal issues of things. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too want to echo my congratulations to Ms. Hill. Excellent work that you put into that. Anytime you can get some additional training to your profession is always a good thing. So kudos to you on that. And your peer in Belton as well. Sounds like she got the same certifications. Also want to extend my thanks to staff as well for putting together the 9/11 remembrance on this past Saturday. Had the opportunity to visit with several of council members and the residents that came out for that. A little technical difficulties, but it's still the musical presentation that was that evening was outstanding, as well as our local police department, South Metro, were there. So it was a good evening to pay remembrance to those on that particular day. And thank you to Mr. Holman as well for the remembrance of our 13 fallen Marines who lost their lives on the final actions of pulling out of Afghanistan. Definitely a challenging time for these past 20 years for those who have loved ones in some capacity, in some way, shape, or form. We've all been touched in some way by someone on that day and the days in defense of that to protect us, so that we don't have another one of those in our nation's borders again. So again, thank you to staff for taking the time to put that program together and to have that recognized on that day. Some of the transition to some of the other things that we've had on the agenda tonight had some pretty passionate debate, passionate opinions regarding the decisions that as a council we've made, but those aren't done in a vacuum. A lot of research, a lot of man hours have gone into determining what does the community want as a whole, what is to the benefit of the community, and it's not without those considerations as some of the most arduous debate centered around the school district, which Mr. Burke artfully brought up some comments regarding that. But I have to also add comment that while this is a single project that we had on the agenda tonight, we have to step up and look at holistically at all the things that we have going on within this community. And that one project is not the one project that's funding as far as from a tax perspective in the school district. There's several other projects that are online or coming online that are also adding to the tax revenues of the school district. That's giving them opportunities to do more, hopefully, in the coming years. So not only the commercial properties, but our residential properties that we have. I think at the last meeting, joint meeting, the mayor counted out, I believe, 7 subdivisions of homes that were under construction, preliminary plats that have been provided to the city that could bring another 12 to 1,500 single-family houses, I believe, if the number stands correctly. Mr. Carteret can give a more accurate number, but that's just my mental math gymnastics on that. So all those things goes into the betterment of our community. While there is no specific one carrot that we can say that you build this will come. Everything's a forecast. In 2020, we did not forecast COVID. In 2007, we did not forecast for the market to go where it did. But all you can do is budget and make budget adjustments and make decisions, on the fly, if you will. But we don't have a habit here on the council or the staff making decisions on the fly. Everything's based in facts and findings. We had a report in January on what was necessary for our growth to add to our police department, our public works, and our parks. And we went to our public and asked for assistance to do that. But that measure was voted down from a use tax. We have done surveys and contracted with those to give us surveys on our transportation and infrastructure. And that has come back with the numbers that we see on our 58, that we see on Lucy Webb, that we see on Dean, and the actions that we've done to add to our system to give alternate routes in and around our community has seen a major increase. Our Fox Ridge, our Dean, our Lucy Webb, we've enjoyed the elbow room for years that Dean and 58 and Lucy Webb has enjoyed. Now that we're growing into those streets, and we're now seeing that, and even as we grow, we're still not at capacity for those streets. That's just with growth. As in our households, we buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom house when you have toddlers. All of a sudden, when everyone's a teenager and adults who've lost the room, where'd the room go? We're at that point. We're getting to that point, and we still have room to grow. So we're just trying to make Raymore for the next generations of Raymorians. Everything we're doing as my time on the council and the next generation of council people are doing things for the next generation of Raymorians while we maintain what we have today. So I'd ask that those would have that vantage point and that view, because who would have thought we'd be ordering groceries to be delivered over the internet? That's what happens today. Who would have thought you could have McDonald's delivered? That's what happens with time. Things have changed. So if we can't recognize and accept that what I liked may not be what you like. What I would like to see in a house or an apartment or a restaurant or pick an activity may not be what the next person wants. But as a community, we're trying to provide opportunities for the majority of our community, and also diversify our balance sheet. Because if all we have is single-family houses and another bubble pops, what happens to us? If all we have is Walmart and Lowe's and Fox Ridge, what happens to us? So we have to find ways to diversify our portfolio so it's not the revenues we need to pay our staff, to pay our police department is not borne solely on our property taxes, the single-family homeowners. Now, I've taken too much time tonight, Mr. Mayor.
No, that was very well said, Mr. Townsend. Thank you, sir. Mr. Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, that was impressive. That was good. 3 things I wanted to say. One, Saturday I was on my way to a symposium which ended in a discussion between Van Jones and Newt Gingrich on what's wrong with America. It was very interesting, the number of things they agreed on. But on the way there, I was driving under the Grandview Bridge, and all of the first responders who were on the bridge. I hope I didn't ruin a moment of silence as I drove under them and honked my horn repeatedly in support of them. But it looked like they all saluted me when I did that. Now, that's why I think I might have ruined their ceremony, but it was really, really moving, and it was difficult to drive as I was having a few tears. Second thing I wanted to talk about is the school district that I've worked for 23 years has probably 7 or 8 times in my career put out a position piece and says, we spend less per pupil than any of the top major competitive districts in the Kansas City area. We get more done with less money. But what that means, since the #1 majority of the money is staff, just like if we said our police force does more with the least resources of any city in the metro area, we would be horrified because we would not be paying them. That's one of the things. We lose so much experience because we don't pay our teachers what Belton, Lee Summit, and many other, probably I could list 15 districts. So that's certainly something I look at. I want the district to be successful so we can keep our good teachers. there are people on this dais that have, their spouses have gone to other districts, mine included. So that's all on that. And then the third part was, if you didn't see the video of the procession, the funeral procession for the Marine in St. Louis, if you didn't see that on TV, it was amazing. I couldn't believe the number of people that they had lined up as the family went first, and then the military vehicle with the casket covered with the American flag on it. It was amazing what they did. But one of the things that I would mention is, I know someone here, that was their job as a Marine in the past, told me this story several years ago. And their job was to follow that family throughout the entire process. They came and let the family know that there was the death, and their job is to stay with that family during the entire process and even help them after the funeral. And I know one of our people on the dais has had 2 experiences with that, and when I just can't imagine that somebody like that isn't exemplary. But that was pretty amazing. Thank you.
Sir. Mr. Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to repeat a couple of things, but Ms. Hill, your professional development, I know you had a good teacher, and you've filled in, and from my perspective, you're doing a fantastic job. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much. Mr. Fairborn, staff, the 9/11 20th year remembrance, certainly, you know, we all have our memories from that, and appreciate you putting that together. Kind of piggyback on some other things. I wish our country could be more like we were on 9/12, the day after that horrible day 20 years ago. I just want to address a couple of things. We looked at the agenda today. It's very apparent that Raymore is growing, and we're open for business, and people are seeing that. I know there was some heartburn on some of this. We listened to some people talk about bringing outside developers and that type of thing. But it's interesting, you can be in your own town, you drive around and you don't see things. Somebody comes from out of town and they look and they see something. And obviously they see opportunity. We've had property that's set in certain areas for over 20 years. People driving by, living in this town, that do developments, that are part of that business, and ignored it for 20 years. And it's interesting, somebody comes in and wants to develop it, and now everybody says, why does somebody bringing somebody from out of town? You know, I guess they need to ask that question. So, and there's plenty of areas left in Raymore to develop as well. Our city is managing our growth very well. I know staff sees lots of things that don't even come before us. I don't know what that number is, but I bet it's 10 to 12 to 1 before we even see it. So we're not sitting there begging for somebody to come in and taking it the first shot and coming in. These things are calculated, they're looked at top to bottom. And you know, these companies that come in and develop, you know, they have to be bonded. You know, all of them have to get loans. There's a lot of background done on them before they ever get to us. So I feel comfortable with my decision tonight, and I am glad that we're open for business, and I appreciate all the hard work staff's doing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Holman.
What is it he usually says? It's hard to go after me. I think tonight he kind of one-ups me there a little bit. Just a couple of quick things. Mr. Mayor, thank you for allowing the moment of silence, sharing many common things in common with you in background and experience. I knew you would want to do that. That's why I brought it up maybe a little bit late, but I appreciate that greatly. congratulations to Erica. Of course, you've been a long and loyal servant of the city, and you worked for a long time with Jeannie to make the city clerk's office better and more professional, and now you've carried on after her retirement, and that's great stuff. Another testament to that, Mr. Fearborn, is your push since the time that we hired you as city manager for an absolute demand that all city employees, whenever possible, pursue continuing professional education, and I think that has really shined through with our staff for quite some time, and it has made the city staff of Raymore become the regional go-to specialist for a lot of these places around here, so well done, sir. And the last thing I would say again, sir, is thanks to you and staff for the 9/11 remembrance ceremony. I apologize profusely. I really wanted to be there, but I have to work. I work second shift, and I was the only one working, and I couldn't be here, so I apologize for missing it. And if you noticed, I think at least one of the major networks carried some pretty innovative coverage on it. But other than that, really didn't hear a whole lot from especially surrounding districts or towns or cities really doing much. I hope that we haven't forgotten the sacrifices of 20 years ago. So again, my kudos, sir, to you and staff. Please pass that on. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Berenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot of great comments here tonight. I start off with thanking the city staff again for the 9/11 ceremony. I wish I was able to attend. I too was out of town. Councilman Barber mentioned something that stuck with me, and that's, I wish we would think more like we did on 9/12. 20 years later. I saw somebody on TV say that too, and it struck a chord with me. It's amazing when you see the aftermath of this even 20 years later, how it really just it really hits you hard. I want to thank those who showed up tonight for the comments in the public. We do occasionally get some calls and emails from people, but I want to thank those that showed up and to voice their opinion in person. If you want to make a change, that's the way to do it. And I know it didn't go their way tonight, but please, if you have an opinion either for or against something, please feel free to show up and voice that opinion. Also, Ms. Hill, again, thank you and for all you do, and congratulations. And that concludes my comments tonight, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, congrats to Erica again as a final note here. I know you work really hard at that position, and we appreciate all the work that you do. And thanks to the staff, Mr. Fearborn, Ms. Harmer, for the hard work you did in putting the 9/11 tribute together the other night. I'm honored to have been chosen as the one to offer remarks that evening, so thank you very much for that. And then with regard to the first item this evening that we dealt into that we received most comments from, I would just ask you, if you're watching this on YouTube later, rewind it to Mr. Townsend and his remarks, because they really struck home the fact that this staff works very hard and this elected body works very hard to work in concert with staff so as to not create a vacuum of information. And so when we do receive information from many of the people that spoke to us this evening, we do receive information from them. We're constantly pinging staff for response and what is their take on it. What is it that they're telling us that we're missing here? And oftentimes those holes are cleared up. Other times we have to research further. And sometimes those opinions are spot on. But we do and we are moving forward in this community as part of the economic development team here. Mr. Fearborn, Mr. Eakey, Mr. Gress, Mr. Carteret, Mr. Crass, and myself, we meet and we discuss the input that comes from prospective developers and what they're looking for in our community. And so we know that that the growth of our community residentially is attracting commercial development. We've seen it happen. It's happening incrementally, but it's going to happen as soon as more rooftops are here, and they're coming here. As Mr. Barber said, people ping us all the time for development within our community, and we're pretty picky about it. The team in front of me here is pretty picky about, you know, how we look and the services we provide to our community. We have opinions about that based upon input from the community. We have those community conversations on a regular basis. We have strategic planning that occurs. So it's not, our decisions are hard. They are hard. And they're not done in a vacuum. There is a lot of research that is done. I try to make it into the office at least once a day here, and I will get input from several of those same team members about things that are happening. We got, today we had a response from a prospective commercial developer that will be very exciting if that comes to fruition. And it's because they are seeing the growth here in our community. And so we, you know, this project, whether they want to call it, I know they want to call it residential, but by state statute and by state constitution, it is commercial property, given the amenities and the things that they provide. And so they have to be looked at legally from that perspective, which is what this body did do. It's not considered just a residential project. There are people living there, but there are people leasing places there. So the amenities they offer and the things that they are providing to the community fall under commercial development. And that's why we considered it the way we did, and why we did the same thing with the lofts of Fox Ridge. Those rooftops will allow us to move forward with other projects in the future. And it is a very calculated risk that this body takes. But it normally and has been successful in nature. And we will continue to make those tough decisions based upon that research and the input that we receive, and not just a few folks who have differing opinions. I understand people don't want us to grow, and I get that. But we're going to grow nevertheless, and we might as well have a say and where we're growing and how we're growing. And that's what this body does up here. I'm very proud of the 7 members here tonight for their input on that and their vote. And I think it was the right thing to do. I know it was the right thing to do. And I'm very proud of the staff for providing us with the necessary research and information to make those educated decisions. That's all I have this evening. I would entertain a motion to adjourn at this time.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Townsend.
I move that we adjourn from the City Council regular meeting for September the 13th.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn?